Greetings brothers, today we're looking at the Sanguinary Guard, our golden host, and we're going to find out just exactly how much of a top tier pick they are in 2021. Welcome to the weekly tactics video. Every Friday we put out a video designed to help you get the most out of your Blood Angels on the tabletop. I'm John, the Blood Angels commander, so if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. So in today's video we're going to do some extensive Mathhammer. We're going to look at tons of different options. We're going to try and settle that debate between axes and swords. We're also going to find out if bringing like over 20 Sanguinary Guard to a battle is a little bit one-dimensional. So stick around, let's get into it. So if anyone's not fully versed in Sanguinary Guard, let's go over that super quick to begin with. And they are 30 points per model. They do have the jump pack. They are armed with either the Carmite sword or axe, and then they have the Angelus bolter. And really for 5 points you can take a power fist, which I really don't advise doing too often. And for 5 points you can take an infernal pistol. Again, I really don't advise doing this too often. So I kind of feel like in their base loadout they're kind of strongest. And then they do have two special rules. One is Angelic Visage, so anytime they're attacked in close combat, it's -1 to hit them. And then the second rule is the Heir of Ascalon rule, where if they're within 6 inches of your Warlord, we essentially get +1 to hit. And finally, they're taken in squads between 4 and 10. I tend to recommend 7 to 9 in my stream, but I mean 10 is okay as well. So let's move straight into survivability. So now, as we're only really looking at the Sanguinary Guard, then I mean the survivability in this table is probably not that useful. We know they have the 2-up save, we know they have a toughness 4. There's no real way to buff them beyond that. You know, there's no stratagems that help them. Unfortunately, we can't play transhuman on them. So here is how many shots a 10-man squad will take to die. So if they're hit with bolt rifles 120 times, then they're dead. Same as if they're hit with plasma, heavy plasmas, strength 9 -4, 3 damage, 10 times, they're dead. However, I've put in Vanguard Veterans with Storm Shields as sort of like a baseline equivalent. We're going to talk a little bit about Vanguard Veterans as a possible alternative to Sanguinary Guard as we go through this video. So we've just put that in, and I've highlighted a few key places where these Vanguard Veterans do a lot better in terms of survivability. And basically it's on any AP3 or higher weapon, because they obviously both share a regular 2-up save. So at that point the Vanguard Veterans do sort of come into their own, and they are generally a bit more survivable, up to 66% more survivable against weapons like multi-meltas. However, one thing to consider here is that Sanguinary Guard are potentially 16% more survivable in close combat due to that -1 to hit them. However, in the examples we've used here, because power fists are already -1, then it actually gives them no benefit. So in the 8 examples we have here, the only time the Sanguinary Guard actually see a benefit is against the power swords, and even then they're not as survivable as the Vanguard Veterans. So worth thinking, considering a squad of 10 Vanguard Veterans with just a Lightning Claw and a Storm Shield actually weighs in 20 points cheaper than the 10 Sanguinary Guard. Obviously you give up a bunch of shooting, but you know, sometimes shooting can be lackluster for Blood Angels best, or not that important. So let's move into the damage, and this is really where we spent the time this week to figure out exactly what the Sanguinary Guard are going to do on the tabletop in every situation. So we have a lot of slides to get through today, 7 I believe, and SA means Shock Assault, SE means Savage Echoes. So in this first slide we're doing Sanguinary Guard against common targets. Now I've put down the power fists, but for the comparison, i.e. when I highlight the row green for saying it's the best in slot, then I've focused my comparison on the swords versus axes. So I recommend generally you take the swords versus axes, so you can see here in all situations what's actually going to perform better. So on the left of these slides we're going to have Shock Assault, and on the right we'll have Savage Echoes and Shock Assault, and you can see here we've just fired these guys against a bunch of different targets, and this is what the 10-man squad will do against your common targets. So against a number of options, like we're talking like armour, to a certain extent monsters, infantry, you know, toughness 5 infantry, I guess like Gravis infantry, even characters or regular infantry, a 10-man squad, even without any buffs, are basically gonna essentially overkill most of these things. So I guess this is why I'm saying like 7 to 9 to me seems like a pretty sweet spot for Sanguinary Guard. So if we move straight on to the next slide, and that will be where we include them within 6 inches of the Warlord to get that additional +1 to hit. So with the +1 from the Heirs of Azkaban, you can really see that these guys are just basically still overkilling just about everything. If you wanted to work out how much damage your squad would do and you have less than 10, then simply divide the number in the cell by 10 and then multiply it by the number in your squad. And you could use that reliably to work out like how many wounds you would essentially do to like Gravis units. That would be the column that says infantry toughness 5 plus 3. So a ton of data here, and yeah, I mean, what we'll move into next is if they were within range of a captain, could it be your chapter master, you know, with his heroic bearing, his 9-inch reroll 1 bubble, and see just how that performs as well. And I think what's kind of interesting here is you could see on the earlier slides, you know, like with no buffs, the swords seem to be quite a little bit ahead in terms of how much damage they could potentially do. But as we start adding some of these buffs, obviously you wound easier with those toughness 6 axes. You can kind of see that the axes kind of come back a little bit. I mean, the swords are generally still ahead, but the axes aren't so far behind. So, I mean, against these common, easy to kill targets, then your swords were 100%, it seems like, your right choice. And I think I have a good spread here of different targets that you can battle. Everything from, you know, like basically like a new Primaris tank to an old Dreadnought to sort of those heavy infantry models. So what we want to do next though is look at the problematic targets, right? Because I think that's what I've been mentioning in my stream a few times, that there are problematic targets now for Sanguinary Guard that basically have those 2 damage weapons. A Dreadnought to some extent is a problematic target, but I guess with this many Sanguinary Guard we're still going to blow through an 8 or 9 wound Dreadnought that just has a 3+ save very easily. So let's start looking at problematic targets next. And so for this I've highlighted 5 things that have been mentioned a few times as quote-unquote problematic targets for us as new codexes come out. Obviously some more will be added to this list, but this is where we are now with sort of the Death Guard and the Dark Angels being the last 2 codexes coming out. So we have the Deathwing Knights. Obviously they are difficult to deal with as they can only be wounded on a 4+ due to their inner circle rule. We have the Blightlord Terminators, who are toughness 5, 3 wound with -1 damage. We have the Galatus Dreadnought, which is a Custode Dreadnought that is -1 damage as well. It's also -1 to hit, so it's generally quite difficult to deal with. I thought I'd put a Leviathan Dreadnought in there. We talked about them just last week. If you haven't entered the giveaway yet, you do. This is basically like one of the last days to enter. I'll put the link up here. You could watch my video from last week on the Leviathan Dreadnought, and if you put a comment on that video, you have a chance to win some Primaris kits that we're giving away on Sunday on the live show. However, the Leviathan Dreadnought definitely makes it up there. Another very survivable Dreadnought with an invulnerable save, -1 damage. And then finally, Mortarion, who is a generally very difficult to kill character at the moment. You know, 3+ save, 4+ invulnerable save, 5+ feel no pain, and then -1 damage again. So the sort of recurring theme here is 4 of these 5 units are -1 damage. So essentially it halves your Sanguinary Guard's damage output, like before we've even rolled a single dice. So again, what I've put in all these situations is the winners between the axes and the swords. And what's interesting here is once you get to these sort of tougher to kill targets where the additional minus AP from the swords doesn't really affect anything anymore, especially when we're in that Savage Echoes phase and your axe is at -3 anyway, then the axes actually start to pull ahead. So, I mean, it's not much, but I mean, the axes are definitely ahead here against these tougher to defeat units, and I guess that basically means like if a unit has a very reasonable invulnerable save that's not going to take too much AP to push it into it, then potentially your axes are going to do better just because you're going to be able to wound a little bit easier. But I mean, it still feels to me like it's 50-50 swords v axes at this point. But there is some slides to come, so let's see how we get through there. Now at the bottom of the slide, I want to jump back really quick to our Vanguard Veterans, and what we're going to say here is we're going to have just 10 Vanguard Veterans, obviously 20 points cheaper than the Sanguinary Guard as mentioned. They are going to be just a single Lightning Claw and a Storm Shield. And how do they do against some of these you know, -1 damage units? And the answer is, you know, pretty great. If we look at the Vanguard Veterans with Shock Assault, and with Shock Assault and Savage Echoes against basically your Blightlord Terminators, your Gallicus Dreadnought, your Leviathan Dreadnought, and even Mortarion, these guys will actually do more damage in every situation here. They'll beat the swords and the axes. Again, I'm not comparing power fists, but yeah, you know, your lightning claws, the ability to do those rerolls to wound, and then essentially, you know, -2 or -3 again, pushing things onto their invulnerable saves, or these problem targets onto these invulnerable saves, and obviously wounding easier, is actually kind of a little bit surprising. But I guess that's the strength of Lightning Claws. This is why a lot of people are considering taking one squad of Vanguard Veterans with Lightning Claws. I guess if you're lining up on a battlefield and you know your opponent's going to have essentially Dreadnoughts, Blightlord Terminators, or something like Mortarion. I mean, Sanguinary Guard literally get murdered by Mortarion. He does so much damage. So having something with a 4+ invulnerable save, and also something that's going to wound very reliably. You can see here, I mean, the Vanguard Veterans are just sneaking ahead in most of these situations. So then let's take our Sanguinary Guard and put them within 6 inches of our Warlord and see how that changes things. And I guess, like, down at the bottom, like, I calculated all these values, but I guess what I really want to just say is being within 6 inches of your Warlord generally, like, not in every situation, but generally increases just their damage output by 25%. So that's really interesting, especially like if you're wondering sometimes when you're on the battlefield how much of a value is at play to keep your Sanguinary Guard within 6 inches of a Warlord. Well, there's your number right there. It's 25% bonus damage, essentially, is what they'll do. However, I just want to say here that even with this 25% bonus damage against both Dreadnoughts in this situation, those Vanguard Veterans from the previous slide, without being near your Warlord, will actually still out-damage them. So, obviously, like the Blightlords and Mortarion, the Sanguinary Guard pull ahead again, but really interesting to know that that Vanguard Veteran squad can kind of be ran independently. You know, they don't need to be with your Warlord, they can be wherever they want to be on the battlefield, and against Dreadnoughts, they, right now, hands down, are better than Sanguinary Guard. I mean, I also feel for the additional survivability, as much as 60% in some situations, and then, 20 points cheaper. I feel like there's totally a place to fit some of these Vanguard Veterans into your army, and if you did want to keep them probably at an exact similar points, you could probably drop a couple of Lightning Claws and throw in some Thunderhammers. That's something we haven't Mathhammered yet, but I'm sure we'll get to Vanguard Veterans in the future. If you tune in and watch every week, it's something that I love. Vanguard Veterans, I think you've seen them for a while. On the list where I was 8-0, I had Vanguard Veterans in every list. And I actually just bought like another 2 boxes, so I now have 20 Vanguard Veterans, and I'm considering dropping some Death Company to fit more Vanguard Veterans in. But I mean, I think that's just the evolution of 9th edition, where like having those strong survivable units that can sit on objectives and generally cause problems is very strong. And like, I do not think the Sanguinary Guard are your strong survivable unit anymore. I think they're a great Alpha Strike unit. I think they do so much damage when they charge. Obviously against a lot of units, they're just going to outrightly wipe out the enemy. However, there is some units now that are going to be problematic for them, and I feel like with their just 2+ save and no invulnerable save, they're not the most survivable unit either. So that's worth thinking about. So next up, we're going to talk about if the Sanguinary Guard are then within the 6 inches of your Warlord, and they also have the reroll 1s. And again, the main takeaway I want to take away from this is the rerolled 1s is additional 16% damage across the board. Now, I mean, it's obvious, like, 1 more dice, or 1 more +1 on your dice is essentially 16%. If you think 1 divided by 6 is 16%. But when I did this maths, it actually came out exactly at 16%. I'm not sure if I was expecting that, but I mean, it's nice to know that that is precisely what will happen if you have ability to reroll 1s, and obviously they hit on 2s, then you're basically just adding another 16%. So I guess comboed up with your 25% from your previous being within 6 inches of the Warlord, then, tactical play on the tabletop, knowing exactly how much damage these guys could do against some of these problematic enemies, might help you just take the edge in a fight phase that maybe you really need to win, for example. And then, having mentioned that the Dreadnoughts are sort of like the Sanguinary Guard's nemesis, I guess, what we did is we just did the same slide, but this time we've swapped out the Power Fist column, which we weren't really looking at. I mean, that's just there for you guys to check it out. And we've put in the Vanguard Veterans column. And what's interesting, I guess, is that 100% once we get into that turn 3 and we're in the Savage Echoes, if the Vanguard Veterans have the same reroll 1s, you know, excluding the fact that they don't have to be within the 6 of your actual Warlord, they could be getting reroll 1s from something else, like a Wisdom of the Ancient or something, then once again, they will out-damage the Sanguinary Guard against Dreadnoughts, or at least difficult to kill Dreadnoughts. And I guess that is what we're talking about here, because in the earlier slides, when we just looked at a normal, like, Chicken Dreadnought, a 3+ Duty Eternal Dreadnought, the Sanguinary Guard kill these fairly easily just through, like, sheer weight of attacks. So for a while now, I've been recommending people consider the Utility Librarian, and I'll put a video to him up here, and you can bring a lot to your army. One of the things you can bring, obviously, is Null Zone. So I'm not sure if anyone's really done this, but I wanted to dive in to just see how valuable Null Zone was, especially with the Sanguinary Guard, right? It combos with them super well, right? Because they have no invulnerable save, so by casting Null Zone, they lose nothing, whereas your enemy obviously loses the invulnerable save. And at that point, the swords will pull ahead. You know, the additional point of AP -1 when there's no invulnerable saves in the equation, they're obviously going to do better than the axes. The axes manage to hold on against those Blightlord Terminators, but overall the swords are generally better. I guess there's probably something to be said, whereas like if you're actually going to play Red Rampage, you're going to get more value probably out of the axes at that point again. So, you know, swords v axes, I don't know if I can settle the debate here, but I think swords are going to be better generally, but axes are going to do better against some of those tough targets. And I guess if you did play Red Rampage, then your axes are going to do better again, but it's situational and you need a bit of luck. But looking at what actually Null Zone will do then for you, and at the bottom of this list against all the difficult targets, I've put the exact amount of increase in damage that Null Zone will give you with each weapon type. So obviously I've shorted these. For example, swords versus the Blightlord Terminators and the Galatas, you're going to get a 33% damage increase. You know, axes against Mortarion, you're going to get a 33% damage increase. So this just lets you know, I guess, how useful Null Zone is going to be. And I guess once we have Savage Echoes up beyond turn 3, in some situations, like swords against Mortarion are literally going to get 100% buff if you could turn off his invulnerable save. Axes against, like, you know, the Blightlord Terminators and the Galatas are going to get a 33% buff. So these guys obviously do combo very well with Null Zone. So I think if you're running, like, I still generally recommend you take Sanguinary Guard. I wouldn't ever say right now don't take them, but if you are running an army, and we have reviewed 2 competitive lists that are running 3 squads of them, I think that is the wrong choice 100%. I think one of those squads needs to be considered something else, and I think that the other thing that we consider right now is the Vanguard Veterans, a much more survivable unit and a really much more better unit against anything that is -1 damage. Also, with a lower EP from the Lightning Claw, I don't think that the Vanguard Veterans really benefit from this Null Zone strategy. So I mean, I guess that gives you a clear, easy strategy to follow within the game, in that your Librarian goes with your Sanguinary Guard to Null Zone some of the hardest to kill targets, and if there is some Dreadnoughts or some armour, you know, with -1 damage, something like that, then that is where your Vanguard Veterans need to go. So an absolute ton of Mathhammer to go into this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's just sum up what we learned. If you want to go back and hit up any of the slides or pause the video, please do. I mean, it was a lot to get through. And if you do want to just get the slides to download to your computer, then you can do that just by becoming a channel member. Every slide I ever make for all my presentations are available to channel members, and you can do that just by clicking the join button underneath this video. So, in summary then, I guess Sanguinary Guard are still, you know, an amazing unit for us, probably one of our strongest hard-hitting units still, and they have great synergy with our Warlord. However, I do think the 10-man squad probably is overkill against most enemies, and this is, I guess, what I would recommend 7 to 9. If in doubt, maybe 2 squads of 8 to start with, and play some games and get a feel for how they do against your opponents. And in most situations, I wouldn't recommend spending points on the Power Fists, or maybe a few points on like Infernal Pistols to try and get that lucky/devastating shot in combat. You know, the Power Fists, while they are generally going to do a bit more damage, it still is capped at 2, and you know, what you lose in the -1 to hit, you kind of make up with the +1 to wound roll. So they're almost wasted points. So maybe you can have a power fist or two, but like I generally wouldn't take a squad full of power fist guys. When I started this video, I thought to myself, maybe we'll finally be able to settle the question of swords versus axes, but it seems like I can't settle it. I think swords maybe slightly have the edge still, but I mean, I guess there's an argument there to like, why not take some swords and some axes, and that would give you a better spread of damage across the board. You know, I see some people take squads of let's say 8 swords and 8 axes, and I think if that was me, I would just mix the squads. It's going to be hard to remember all those slight nuances where like swords do like some more damage against this. You know, like there's so many back and forth between those. I think if I was going to do it, I'd just split the squads, 4 swords, 4 axes, and just sort of take it from there. And yet, when we talk about those problematic units, which I think people have been asking about in various Facebook groups, my Discord, etc., when we come up against those problematic units, then this is why I think the Vanguard Veterans are in a great situation right now. And you know, the one thing that we didn't Mathhammer today is we never tried Chapter Master rerolls on the Vanguard Veterans. You know, we did try them in a couple of situations, and we did try them with reroll 1s, but because Vanguard Veterans hit on 3s, and there's no minuses to hit with them, and I guess Vanguard Veterans could use Quake Bolts as well if you wanted to give the Sergeant some sort of Quake Bolt. So based on that, and I guess like I definitely feel like having a squad of Vanguard Veterans right now, I think they're a top tier pick, and I think there's enough diversity on the battlefield where they can get pretty good value. And I guess against those 1 damage enemies, you won't be losing any, you know, you won't be losing any damage, or the 1 wound enemies, sorry, you won't be losing any damage. And against anything that has that -1 to damage, these guys obviously, it's against the Sanguinary Guard, it's almost like a serious buff. You know, it really brings them up and makes them generally quite a scary unit to have to deal with. So in hindsight, you know, adding the Warlord within the 6 inches of the Sanguinary Guard is a 25% damage buff. Adding that reroll 1 is a 16% damage buff. Adding the Null Zone, again, is very problematic, and I guess that's sort of like a top tier pick. So used correctly, all these things can align quite nicely. And again, I think this comes back to the idea of running 3 Sanguinary Guard. If you're going to run 3 Sanguinary Guard, the chances of being able to keep all 3 within 6 inches of your Warlord, I would say, is slim. So would it not be better to just have a Vanguard Veteran squad that's off on their own, you know, a survivable squad that can do their own thing? And I mean, I've run Vanguard Veterans now in my list that's on an 8-game winning streak, and I feel like I feel like they always perform. Like, I've never once thought like, oh, those Vanguard Veterans need to be dropped, you know. And I am generally going to continue. As soon as we're back on the tabletop, you're going to see some Vanguard Veterans from me, and I guess you can make some decisions of your own. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you like a lot of food for thought, especially when you're planning out future army lists, and also you know, just helped you maybe decide how you're going to arm your Sanguinary Guard, and also maybe how you're going to try and deal with some of these problematic things that we're going to see in our games. So, a lot of math this week, and I guess we will get back to something a little bit lighter in the near future, but thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate all the support you guys give me. If you would like to leave me a like, it would be very much appreciated, and you know, if you are running multiple squads of Sanguinary Guard, or even if you're not, please leave me a comment on your feedback and or what you think is going to be the best choice going forward. We do now have a Facebook group and a Discord open, so you can find links to those in the video description if you want to come hang out. Hope to see you all in the next video. By the blood are we made, brothers. Peace.